I want to talk about Ace. And the reason I'm going to talk about Ace Frehley here to start the show, this is a very influential guy on so many people that have decided to pick up a guitar and start playing and basically become a musician. I think 95% of the bands I've ever interviewed, and pretty much all of the bands I know personally, whether they are extremely successful and well known, or bands that have more or less like a cult following, I would say almost all of them, especially the guitar players, will tell you that a guy like Ace Frehley and his onstage persona and his playing style influenced them to go out, pick up a guitar, and start playing. I would say 95% of the people that I know that are in bands who are very, very successful picked up a guitar for the first time and started playing because of Ace Frehley, the spaceman, and the onstage persona he brought out on stage that had such a huge positive impact on so many people. For example, as many of you know, Halloween is a great example of, a band that had an influence from Kiss. If you talk to Andy Darris, he will flat out tell you Kiss was pretty much one of, if not the band that really inspired him to become a musician. The first ever interview that I did with him back in 1998, I said to him, what bands really influenced you? And the first band he named without hesitation was Kiss. Huge influence on him. Huge influence on a lot of other people that I know. Huge influence on a lot of bands I've run into. I remember when Ace passed away, I can't even tell you the amount of text messages I received from people in bands that I know. But this man had a profound influence on people. And if his guitar playing really didn't influence somebody, like, as far as like his actual playing, his on-stage persona and what he brought on stage with a larger-than-life band like Kiss influenced a lot of these people to want to become a musician. Interestingly enough, I have a couple stories in regards to Kiss, in regards to Ace. So the first ever arena show that I've ever watched. Now, I had been to some big outdoor shows. I had been to a lot of shows that were small clubs when I was in high school, but I had never seen any band in an actual arena. And on July 20th, 1996, I was able to go to a Kiss concert here in Cleveland, Ohio, at what was known as Gund Arena, which is now known as Quicken Loans Arena downtown. And here, I'm going to show you. Here's my tour book for that concert, 1996-97. This was definitely a tour book I purchased. Now, back then, I had just graduated high school, so I really could barely afford tickets to this thing. I believe we ended up getting nosebleed seats, and actually, it was kind of cool because you could see the whole stage from up top in these seats and see pretty much everything. If you were on the floor, you probably didn't really take in a lot of the stuff going on stage, but from the seats that we had, because that's all we could afford as high school kids, you could see a lot on stage. And I was blown away by that show. And to give you an even better story, I really didn't know much about Kiss at all. Some friends of mine convinced me to go. My first Kiss album didn't even have Ace on it. It was the album Revenge, because that's what came out when I ended up getting into the band. And I really hadn't explored them yet. I knew some of the songs that were played on the radio, but I really hadn't explored their music yet. So I went into the show never hearing, or not really never hearing, but not owning any of the albums from the songs that they played live. So this show, when I saw it for the first time, actually seeing this, I was completely blown away. First of all, when we walked into the arena, the amount of people in Kiss costumes and Kiss makeup I had never seen anything like that before in my life. I had never seen anything like this in my life in person. the fan base for this band was absolutely incredible. One of the greatest fan bases of any band I have ever seen in person. Some of these people, their costumes looked incredibly authentic. And the makeup. I mean, there were people that I would see them walk in. I'm like, man, is that Gene? Like, literally, you would look at these people and think, man, they really did an incredible job looking like the band. The amount of merch that was getting sold at this show was insane. I ended up being able to, I think we walked up to a t-shirt booth and there were like 2 t-shirts left. Luckily, they had my size. The t-shirt has since been worn out and is long gone, but I have the tour book. And I could barely afford the tour book and the t-shirt. Again, I was a high school kid. I was 18. Didn't have a lot of money back then, but man, I have to say, I was totally blown away by seeing this band for the first time. And Ace was incredible on stage. The whole band was really incredible on stage. Peter Criss, Gene Simmons, Paul Stanley. It was a larger-than-life rock show. And it's actually the only time I've ever seen Kiss play a show with Ace in the band. Oddly enough, it's the only time I've ever seen Kiss live. Because again, when they would come play here, schedules wouldn't line up. I wouldn't go. I had to work or whatever the case may be, or I couldn't get off work. However, that show is one that I will never forget. Again, I didn't know the impact of this band really. See, back then, I was just maybe 3 or 4 years in when it comes to hard rock and heavy metal music. So I really didn't know a lot of the history either. But I ended up getting a lesson by seeing how many Kiss fans showed up, wearing the makeup, everybody singing the songs. And even though I hadn't heard most of the songs in that set list, I made sure the next day after I went to this show, I saved up as much money as I could and I bought every Kiss album that they had. All from the 70s. Absolutely incredible band live. And that is definitely a show I'll never forget. As far as Ace is concerned, and as far as Kiss is concerned, let me talk about him for a minute. I think the guy was an incredible songwriter and a guitar player. When you listen to those Kiss solo albums that came out back in the late 70s, and I know I'm going to get a lot of flack for this, his solo album, in my opinion, was my favorite. And not only that, but I liked it better than the other 3 solo albums combined. I mean, Paul Stanley, Gene Simmons, I could flip a coin as to how much I liked either one of them. The Peter Criss album, probably my least favorite of the 4. But the Ace Frehley solo album, for me, personally, is my favorite of those 4 solo albums. And I remember distinctly first hearing the song Ozone, which is probably still my favorite song off of that album. And then later on, as I ended up getting into this music and I ended up going, doing the radio show, what I used to do is I would always go, I had to play a show. I had to air a couple shows after my show ended. So what I would do is I'd put those shows on the radio. Mind you, this is 1998. There was no streaming. So everything's live in real time there on the radio, but I had some pre-recorded shows that I would play. And what I would do is go back into the radio station record library and just pick random albums by hard rock and heavy metal bands, go into the production room next to the on-air studio, which was at WBWC 88.3, and I would listen to music I had never heard before. And I remember distinctly getting the Frehley's Comet album and seeing that in there. And I'll be honest with you, when it comes to stuff from the 80s, like Kiss, like when you listen to the music that Kiss did in the 80s, I think that Frehley's Comet album was every bit as good as anything Kiss did in the 80s. Albums like Crazy Nights and Lick It Up, and you had Hot in the Shade. Asylum, probably my favorite 80s Kiss album. I think Ace's Frehley's Comet album was every bit as good as what Kiss was doing. It really was. Then, you had Second Sighting, you had Trouble Walking. The newest album that he came out with, the newest solo album, I think it was '09, was Anomaly, which I think was great. But I really, really liked his solo stuff a lot. And the guy was he wasn't a bad singer either. And he was a pretty damn good guitar player. He really was. Now, my biggest regret, and I have this regret in regards to a lot of artists out there. I had a chance to interview Ace Frehley. The interview was offered to me. And there are times where schedules do not line up to where, like, you know, someone presents, hey, you want to bring this artist on your show, and I can't do it. And that happened. The one opportunity I ever had to really interview Ace Frehley would have been on my radio show. I wasn't able to take that opportunity. The thing that I regret the most about it is that I look back at when that interview was offered to me, and if I really had wanted to put the effort in, I probably could have done it. It would have been a little hard, but I probably could have made it work. And I look back at the 27 years of almost 28 years I've done this show, and there are a few artists that I could have talked to, or I could have talked to more, where I regret not being able to talk to them. You know, like Ronnie James Dio, I was able to interview several times in the early 2000s. And then later on, I would have subsequent opportunities to talk to him on the radio show. And sadly, the schedules didn't line up, but if I really worked at it, I probably could have done it. And so if you know, people always ask you, what is like one of the regrets you have about the Metal Command show? And that is probably the only one. Artists I could have spoken to, or could have spoken to more, not really putting a little bit more effort into fitting them into my schedule. Nowadays, I try to fit them in my schedule much better than I did back then. But that's the one regret. I would have loved to have interviewed that man. But I think the guy was an incredible guitar player and an incredible influence on this music. I don't think hard rock and heavy metal music would be what it is today if Kiss did not exist, especially what they did in the 70s. Because what they did in the 70s was larger than life. And during that reunion tour with that classic lineup, I was able to witness that at least once in my life. And it's a concert that I will never forget. Anyhow, this is my tribute to Ace Frehley. I would love in the comments to hear what your favorite album or song written by him actually is. And did Ace inspire you? Are you a musician? I would love to hear your stories of your first Kiss concert with him playing, or even seeing him live with Frehley's Comet. I'd be very interested to hear that stuff. I always love to hear people's stories and reactions when, you know, they talk about, you know, different bands that they've seen live. But Ace was truly a phenomenal character. He was definitely a little bit of a different character than Gene and Paul. And, you know, again, it's a very sad day. It was a very sad day when that man passed away because he really made his mark. And he made his mark more than people think. I didn't even realize. I mean, I knew the guy was influential, but when he passed away, I had so many musicians. My entire timeline was full of Ace Frehley tributes from so many great musicians out there. It really showed what kind of a positive impact this man had on not only a lot of music fans, but many musicians as well. So that's what I have to say. I'd love to hear your comments. What is your favorite Ace solo album? Mine is, of course, the first one, which I ended up getting a really gently used original pressing of that recently. And Godspeed to Ace, the man, just an incredible influence on this type of music. Hey, it's Tony here from the Metal Command Show. I want to thank you for watching this portion of the program. Since 1998, I have hosted the show, which started off as a radio program and is now into the podcast format. So I want to thank you for watching and or listening. And if you want to support the program, hit the subscribe button, hit that little bell to be notified anytime I do post any content. A lot of you have been supporting the show and really, really helping this show grow, and I cannot do it without all of you. So with that said, thanks for watching. Stay metal.